Getting an offer and selling your home, that's the easy part. Anybody can do that. Closing on it, that's what this is all about, and that's where things get tough. In this video, I'm going to show you what you must do before you accept an offer from a potential buyer. And more importantly, I'm going to show you what you must not do. So you have somebody interested in your house. They want to buy it. They tell you they do. Do you have it sold? No. In Michigan, you have something called the Statute of Frauds. And what that says is that all real estate agreements must be in writing and signed by all parties in order to be valid and enforceable, except for leases for less than 1 year in length. Verbal agreements are simply not valid. The very first thing you have to do is you have to examine the buyer's qualifications to buy your house. Did he apply for a mortgage? Did he not? Did he talk to a loan officer? Did he not? Did he get you a copy of the lender's pre-approval letter or certificate, or is it all just talk? I mean, even a cash buyer should provide you with proof that they have the money. I've had people over the years try to tell me they're buying cash, and when you go to corner them and ask them if they have the cash, like, no, well, I just won a lawsuit, and I'm going to be getting the money one of these days. Lawsuits are contested. Sometimes they go on for years before they get the money. Bank statements or other hard proof means the money is available in the buyer's name and it's ready to be used. Now, generally, a loan officer that this person talked to and got pre-qualified for will have a certificate or a piece of paper that says how much he's qualified for, how much he has to put down, what kind of loan he's approved for, and it'll all say that right on the certificate. But those documents are not worth the paper they're printed on without some follow-up. You or your representative must talk to whoever he spoke to, whoever signed the letter, and question them about the level of the pre-approval. Now, does the certificate or the letter say he's pre-approved, or does he just say he's pre-qualified? There's a big difference. Pre-qualified means that the loan officer may have just talked to him on the phone, and he's going by what the buyer told him. How's your credit score? I don't know. I think it's good. How much do you make a year? $60,000. Okay, that's not been verified. Pre-approval means that the loan officer actually got the guy's tax return, so he knows how much he made. He actually ran a credit report. He knows what's on there. On a pre-approval, his income has been documented by the place he works, or at least his tax returns for the past couple of years. The down payment has been verified with his bank statements, so he knows that there's money in the bank for the closing costs. And it was all put into a computer, run through, and the computer will give him an approval or a conditional approval. You need to see what he's approved for, what type of loan he's approved for. You have to see if there's any conditions for that approval. Pre-approved means that his credit score, his credit report has actually been ran, and the lender has a hard copy of that credit report and knows what's on there. His bills, his payment history, if there's any lates, it's all in writing. It also means that his income has been verified with tax returns for the past 2 years. So he knows what he made the year before and the year before that. Not only that, the lender will send a letter to his employer, and his employer will tell him how much he made year to date. And he'll usually get his last tax return and show you. So if he says he makes $60,000 a year and it's already June and he's only made $20,000 so far for the first half of the year, you know there's a problem. Sometimes the income on his paycheck stub is showing it's mostly overtime. The lenders don't always count overtime as regular income. So that's all got to be checked out. The credit report is also going to state what his bills are. He'll know exactly how much the buyer owes because they'll only approve them for a certain amount. You got house payments, car payments, and so much, and they're only going to approve 43, 50, sometimes up to 55% of his total expenses. You got to look and see if there's any contingencies. Well, the lender will approve him. However, he's got to prove this and this and this. You got to see it in writing and see if it can be approved. Where are they living now? You need to know that. Is he being kicked out? Or has his house been sold? Does he have to close in 30 days? Does he have 6 months? All these questions have to be asked. Did the buyer pay an application fee to the lender? Usually when you apply for a loan, you have to pay for the appraisal, the credit report, and maybe up to a 1% application fee. If the buyer hasn't paid any fees toward that, maybe he has not been pre-approved. And the lender will also verify how much cash he has. He'll ask the buyer how much he has. Well, $3,000. Okay, let me see your bank statement showing you where the $3,000 is. Sometimes they tell them they're going to get $3,000 because they're planning on selling a car. All that stuff's got to be verified or it can come back and bite you. So just because the buyer gives you a piece of paper signed by some loan officer saying, I pre-qualified him up to a certain amount, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. You or your realtor or your attorney or whoever's representing you needs to call and speak to that loan officer to see if the pre-qualification is real. If the buyer just called him and the loan officer took a little information on the phone, he just says, yeah, you're probably qualified up to a $150,000 house. It doesn't mean anything. So you got to get in writing. You got to follow up and check out all this stuff. There are some other things you're going to need in order to put your offer together. Otherwise, it's just talk. And I'm going to go over that right now. First of all, you need a purchase agreement that's totally in writing. It should be an official form, and it should be completely filled out with no blank spaces. You need to have, in the state of Michigan, something called a seller disclosure. This is required by the state of Michigan, and you can get one of these from a real estate agent or an office supply store, or there's several places you can get them. Call me and I'll tell you where, I can send you one. But a seller disclosure form says, we'll ask the seller what's wrong with the house, and he'll ask you questions on each. Does the plumbing work? Does the roof leak? When's the last time the basement leaked? He'll go through that, and the buyer signs it. This must be shown to a buyer before he writes an offer, and all parties sign it. If the buyer and the seller do not sign a seller disclosure statement, the buyer can call the deal off the last minute and not lose any deposits. He can back out. You also need a lead-based paint disclosure. That's a federal law. And that's if you're going to sell the house or if you're going to rent the house. The seller has to fill out a seller disclosure form stating whether the house has ever been inspected for lead-based paint or not. You need to order title work. You got to make sure that the house is in your name. Maybe you did it with a quitclaim deed. Maybe the house is in yours and your brother's name if you inherited it, or your ex-wife's name. You need to have title work to make sure that you can sell the house. You need to have a deposit agreement because your offer is no good unless there's a deposit. A deposit that the buyer can lose if he backs out. You need to see if there's any contingencies. The buyer might say, well, yeah, I can buy your house, but I sold mine. I got to wait for mine to close. Well, guess what? Now you got to check out all the way back to the other buyer to see if that buyer was qualified. And then in some cities, home inspections are required in order to get a certificate of occupancy. And that needs to be addressed in your purchase agreement along with who's going to do the repairs. Now, the offer should have a substantial cash deposit. Who's going to hold the deposit? Is the buyer going to give you $3,000? They don't like to do that. They like to have a third party hold it sometimes. So That's all got to be discussed. A lot of times, if you order pre-title from a title company, the title company can hold the deposit. As long as you have a purchase agreement that addresses what happens if the transaction falls. Now, if the buyer just backs out, you should be able to keep the deposit. But if you disapprove for the loan, the buyer gets his deposit back. Now, there are a lot of other issues that have to be addressed in the purchase agreement, and I'll go over a few here, but the main thing is you want to make sure the buyer is qualified to buy the house. You got to get your pre-title. You got to see if the house is actually in your name and what you have to do in order to transfer the property. Once the buyer is approved, you got to see if there's any mortgage contingencies. Yes, I'm approved, but you have to do this. You might have to sell a boat. You may have to sell a car. Are there any occupancy issues? Any issues getting the cash together? Do you have a certificate of occupancy? A lot of these homes are subject to a final walkthrough. You got to keep the house in the same condition it was in when the buyer first saw the property. And if the house is in a different condition than when he first saw the property, you're going to have to correct it or the buyer can back out. So all these things have to be addressed in the purchase agreement, and these things have to be looked at before you accept an offer. Now remember, way back in the beginning of this video, I said the hard part is closing the transaction, not selling it. There's two main entities that you have to satisfy. One is the mortgage company or the lender. The other is the title company, who's going to basically collect all the money and disperse the funds, as well as prepare all the paperwork, as well as the deed and everything. You have to be able, if a mortgage contingency comes up, you have to be able to solve that. The mortgage, one of the contingencies could be a low appraisal. What if you sell it for a higher amount and the house appraises for less? Now you got to renegotiate. What about a certificate of occupancy? The city might find repairs on the house that's way more than either one of you want to pay. That's all got to be renegotiated or financed or taken care of somehow. What about occupancy? Buyer needs to be out of his place by a certain date, but you don't have a place lined up yet. Or you have a place lined up and you need to go now, but the buyer can't close for 3 or 4 months. Again, all that's got to be negotiated and worked out ahead of time or renegotiated when the issue comes up. What about cash issues? Sometimes the buyer don't have the cash and he's got to get it. The lender may say, well, we'll approve you, but instead of 3% down, we want 5% down. All that's got to be renegotiated and fixed. And then there's the final walkthrough. You know, when you first showed the house to the buyer, the house was in a certain condition. They're entitled to walk through the house 24 to 48 hours before closing. And if anything is broke or anything is not working or if it's dirty or if it's not cleaned out or what they expected, buyer can back out. Sometimes the bank will run the buyer's credit again and see that it's different than when they first applied for the mortgage. Buyer might have got excited, went out and bought $8,000 worth of furniture. Now that shows up on his credit report. That may affect the sale. So you have to be able to renegotiate or figure out what you're going to do about that. Sometimes they pull another bank statement from the buyer and they find out that $5,000 just showed up out of nowhere. Well, the buyer sold a car. Well, now you have to have all the documents prove that the money came from there. The bank doesn't want to approve the loan if the buyer borrowed $5,000 to buy a house. So that's got to be considered too. So let's say we got all this stuff worked out and we're all ready to go. And what do we do next? Well, the bank wants all its documents in a row in the file. The title company wants all its issues dealt with and in the file. And once they both have all that stuff together, they're going to grant you what's called a clear to close. Now it's time to celebrate because all you got to do is pick a date and you're going to end up owning your own house, closing on it, getting your money, and hopefully everybody will live happily ever after.